The snow had been falling since noon, and by dark there was no longer a highway. Only a white corridor between walls of pine, erasing the center line, erasing the shoulder, erasing everything. The temperature stood at 0 and kept dropping. No other vehicles. No lights in either direction. Only the wind and a black Range Rover angled across the shoulder, its hood releasing white smoke into the frozen sky. Dana Ashworth was on her knees in the snow beside it, hands braced against the door, head down, breath coming in hard white bursts. Across the road, a cabin door flew open, and a man came running. He didn't call out. He just ran. Cole Merritt reached her before she had time to stand. She registered warmth, the real kind, radiating from a body that had been working, and then movement, and then wood smoke and pine resin, as he pulled her through the cabin door and lowered her onto a couch that was rough and solid, and the most welcome surface she had ever touched. She heard the fire before she felt it. A low crackle, then heat pressing against the left side of her face. She heard him moving through the room with the efficiency of someone who does not need to think about what comes next. Log against iron grate, damper adjusted, small, deliberate actions in the right order. She lay still and let the warmth find her. She came back in pieces. The warmth, the wool blanket across her legs, the amber light of a single lamp, then the full awareness of the room. Plank floors, low ceilings, bookshelves along one wall, a wood stove burning hard in the corner, simple and clean. He was crouched near the fire, adding a log. Tall, broad-shouldered, early 40s, flannel shirt with sleeves pushed up, dark hair going gray at the temples. "Did you call for help?" Her voice came out rougher than she expected. His eyes were a quiet gray. Roads blocked. "Cell service went out yesterday afternoon. You're staying here tonight." She pushed upright against the couch arm. "I have a board meeting in Chicago tomorrow morning. I need a charger, a map, some kind of alternate route." He stood, crossed to the kitchen, poured something from a pot on the stove into a ceramic mug, and placed it on the table in front of her. "Drink this first," he said. She looked at the mug. He went back to the fire. She picked it up because the tea was hot and she was still cold, and neither of them said anything. Outside, the storm pressed against the glass. She watched him while she drank. He moved around the cabin the way people move in spaces they have earned, through long occupation, no wasted motion, no hesitation. He knew exactly where everything was. This was a man who had arranged his life deliberately and lived inside it without apology. He had not asked her name, had not asked why she was on this road or where she was going. He had pulled her out of the snow and made her tea and appeared prepared to let everything else wait. She could not remember the last time someone had done that. He stepped out to check her car. She set the mug down, peeled off her ruined heels, and walked across the plank floors in her stockings. The room covered in a few steps. Kitchen, reading chair, couch, wood stove. A narrow staircase along the far wall, and on the wall beside the stairs, mounted on reclaimed wood, a framed engineering drawing. A bridge, hand-drawn pencil lines and load notations and cross-sections in a cramped, precise hand. At the bottom right corner, inside the standard title block, a signature and a credential stamp. G. Merritt. P. E. Dana stood very still. The name, not the face. She had never had a face for it. Just the name, in a column of names in a spreadsheet. 3 years ago. First round of a restructuring she had ordered when she took over Ashworth Infrastructure. C. Merritt, Engineering Division. First group out. She was standing in his house, a sound from the staircase. Small feet on wood. A girl came down in pajamas, 7 years old, at most clutching a stuffed bear. Dark hair like her father, eyes soft with sleep. She stopped on the bottom step and looked at Dana with the frank curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't looking. "Is Dad out there saving you?" she asked. Dana opened her mouth, closed it. "He does that sometimes," the girl said. "I'm Lily." Dana said. Lily nodded and crossed to the fire, holding one palm toward the heat. Dana looked at the drawing on the wall, and then at this child who had grown up here with a father who drew bridges by hand and hung them on his wall, and felt something compress in her chest, that she was not yet ready to examine. Cole came back through the front door in a gust of cold air. He looked at Lily once. "You should be in bed." "I heard a car," Lily said. "You heard the storm." "Bed." Lily went, unhurried, up the stairs. Cole looked at Dana. His eyes moved briefly to the drawing and then back to her face, and nothing in his expression changed. He went to the kitchen, and she heard the sound of a pot and water running, and she stood in the middle of his cabin and said nothing. She constructed the rational argument, because she was very good at constructing rational arguments. It went. She did not know for certain that C. Merritt on the drawing was the same C. Merritt from the Ashworth records. Cole was a common initial. P.E. was a credential category, not a specific identifier. There were dozens of licensed structural engineers in Montana, possibly hundreds. She was also aware of how much work this argument was doing that had nothing to do with logic. Cole put soup on the stove. One cutting board, a sharp knife, vegetables from a crate near the door, broth from a can. He set a bowl in front of her when it was ready, and sat across the table with his own. And for several minutes the only sounds were a spoon against ceramic and the storm on the glass. "Just the two of you here?" she asked. "Just us." "How long?" 3 years, give or take. He was comfortable with silence in the way people become comfortable with it through long practice. He did not fill the quiet with reassurance or explanation. When he finished eating, he took both bowls to the sink and said, "You can sleep on the couch. Blankets are in the chest by the stairs. The fire will hold through the night if you keep the damper where it is." He had not asked her name, had not asked why she was on this road in a blizzard or where she was going. He had pulled her out of the snow and fed her, and was now preparing to sleep. And he had not asked her a single question that required her to account for herself. She thought about the name on the wall. She thought about the spreadsheet, and the legal review, and the recommendation from the restructuring consultants, and the decision she had made in her 3rd week as CEO. She poured the last of the tea into her mug and sat by the fire and said nothing, and neither did he, and the storm went on. The house shuddered at midnight. A deep groan from the roof, a sharp crack from the north wall. Dana came up from a shallow sleep, blanket falling, and put her feet on the floor. The fire had burned very low. Cole was already on the stairs, flashlight in hand, pulling on his boots by the door. "Pipe," he said. "Exterior supply line. If it goes, we lose heat by morning. Can you fix it?" "That's the plan." Dana stood, crossed to the hook beside his, and took down the other coat hanging there heavier, canvas, sized for him. She pushed her arms through and turned up the collar. Cole looked at her. Just looked. "I'll hold the flashlight," she said. "You don't have to." "I know." He held her gaze for 1 second. Then he opened the door. The cold outside was a different order from the cold that had caught her on the road. That cold had been stunning, disorienting. This was sharp, and she was ready for it. The wind had dropped since nightfall, but the snow still came sideways in the flashlight beam. She tracked the light along the north wall while he worked, adjusting when his hands changed position, holding steady when both were occupied. They did not speak. She understood what he needed the light to show him, and she showed it to him. And he worked with the focused economy of a man who knows exactly what must happen before something gets worse. 20 minutes in cold that eventually moved past sensation into something abstract, a total condition, a fact about the world. Then he said, "That'll hold," and they turned for the door. Under the overhang, stamping snow from their boots, the flashlight still burning between them, Dana looked at his hands. She wasn't sure why that was the moment. The light, maybe, or the cold stripping things to essentials. His hands were large and calloused, scored with small scars from a long practice of physical work. The hands of a person who had built things, who had repaired things, who had learned over years what made something hold against the pressure applied to it. She thought about the hands she saw most often at work. Lawyers arranging documents, analysts clicking through slides, board members folded forward in their chairs. Those were not bad hands, they did real work. But they had never fixed a pipe in a blizzard at midnight because a 7-year-old was asleep upstairs. And the alternative was that she woke cold in a house that had stopped working. She had seen his name on a bridge design. She had seen what those hands had once drawn. She was seeing what they had become in the years since, and she could not look away. He went back inside. She followed, and the cabin closed around them with its smell of wood smoke and pine. The fire rebuilt. The clock read 1:30. Cole poured coffee from a pot keeping warm on the back burner, handed her a mug, and sat at the far end of the couch. She sat at the near end. They held their mugs in both hands and looked at the fire. It was the particular quiet that settles after physical work in the cold, after a real problem, handled with real consequences. This quiet asked for nothing. It had no agenda. It was simply what remained when the necessary thing had been done, Cole said. I used to design bridges. He said it the way thoughts become sentences before the speaker has quite decided to let them. She kept her eyes on the fire. What happened? Layoffs. Company went through a restructuring. I was in the first round. He paused. Ellen Lily's mother she had passed the year before, so I had the severance and Lily and a decision about what came next. I found this land. It was cheap, because nobody wanted to be this far from anything. I thought the distance was the point. Was it? For a while. Now it's just where we live. Do you miss the work? Every day. Simply. No performance in it. Are you angry about how it happened? He turned and looked at her. Truly looked. For the first time since she'd woken on his couch. His eyes were calm, not the calm of someone without feelings, but of someone who has decided feelings are not the most important thing present. Yes, he said, but anger doesn't heat the house. She looked back at the fire. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, the logs shifted and settled. The clock moved past 2, and she sat with the weight of what she was not saying. She tried to find a word for what she owed this man. She could not find it. She did not sleep. She had found a pen behind a takeout menu in the kitchen drawer and a notepad on the shelf above it. She took both back to the couch and sat with them in her lap and did not write anything for a long time. When she finally wrote, she wrote her full name first, Dana Ashworth, then Ashworth Infrastructure Group, then, after a pause, April 14th, 3 years ago. Then the pen moved again, almost without her deciding it. Restructuring, first round. C. Merit. She folded the notepad to that page, set the pen beside it on the kitchen table, and waited. Cole came downstairs at 6:15. The light through the windows was the flat white of a snowbound morning. He went to the stove first, put the kettle on, turned and stopped when he saw her at the table with the notepad in front of her. He crossed the room, picked it up, and read it. The kettle started to whistle. He did not reach for it. He read the page once and then again, and set the notepad on the table, and stood with both hands flat on the wood surface, looking down at his own name in her handwriting. I knew it was you from last night, she said. When I saw the drawing on the wall, he looked at her. I didn't know how to say it, she said. He lifted the kettle from the burner without looking at it, set it aside, and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. What did you think I was going to do? He said. His voice was level, not cold, just level, the way a practical question sounds. She had managed hostile acquisitions, failed contracts, regulatory investigations, and the board challenge that had removed her predecessor. She was rarely without words in adversarial situations. I don't know, she said. He looked at the notepad. Halton Bridge. Did it get built? She held his gaze. Yes, he nodded. Not as if this were news. She had the sense he had known for some time, had perhaps looked it up once, and then left it alone. He nodded as if he had needed to hear her say it directly. That was your design, she said. I know whose design it was. From upstairs came the soft thump of Lily's feet on the floor, the creak of the bed. 2 minutes, perhaps 3. The company retained intellectual property rights under the standard employment agreement, Dana said. Cole looked at her steadily. I know. Legal explained it to me very thoroughly. She felt the sentence land where it was intended to land and did not flinch from it. Then Lily was on the stairs. She had her bear under one arm and a piece of paper in the other, a drawing done in the confident, approximate lines of a child who has not yet learned to doubt what her hand produces. She walked to the table and laid the drawing between the two adults, with the easy authority of someone who does not recognize that the air in the room has weight. A bridge, rough, the lines not quite meeting at the joints, but unmistakably a bridge, with parallel horizontal strokes underneath for water. "Dad taught me," she said to Dana. "He says bridges are how people get to each other." Dana looked at the drawing for a long time. Cole picked it up and held it. Dana sat across from him and did not look away. The morning settled around all three of them in the way mornings settle after nights that have cost something real. The snow stopped by 9. A plow worked its way down 83 from the north, and by 10:30, a county sheriff's pickup had come down the cabin drive with a mechanic from the nearest town. The mechanic spent 12 minutes under the Range Rover. When he stood, he brushed snow from his knees, and his expression was not the expression of someone delivering a mechanical diagnosis. "Miss Ashworth," he said, "your brake line didn't fail. It was cut. Not all the way through, just enough that you'd lose braking pressure after a few miles. And your engine was running hot because someone packed debris into the grill. Whoever did this wanted it to look like a breakdown." The county deputy was writing in a notebook. Cole stood at the edge of the porch, hands in his coat pockets, very still. Dana processed what she'd heard the way she processed most critical information quickly, without visible reaction, by immediately identifying what it meant and what it required. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. board meeting in Chicago. A vote on whether she retained operational control of Ashworth infrastructure. A shareholder coalition accumulating position for 18 months. She had known they were close to having the votes. Someone had known her route. Someone had decided she was more manageable on a mountain road than in a boardroom. Behind her, Cole said, "Do you need to be in Chicago before 9 tomorrow morning?" She turned. He was watching from the porch with that same level expression. "Yes," she said. He held her gaze a moment. Then he went inside. He came back out 10 minutes later with a duffel bag and his truck keys. He had already called his neighbor Ruth, 4 miles down a logging road. Had known Lily since before the child could walk. Lily emerged with her overnight pack and her bear, and looked at Dana with the same direct curiosity she had applied to everything since coming down the stairs the night before. "Are we driving her to Chicago?" she asked her father. "Ruth's," he said. "Okay." He drove Lily to Ruth's and came back without elaboration, and Dana was on the porch when he returned with her coat buttoned and her phone on its last charge, and whatever she had understood about this situation now quietly revised. Cole's truck was 12 years old. 4-wheel drive with 140,000 miles on it, and a heater that worked with the reliability of something maintained by a person who understood what things were for. The roads were rough for the first hour, and bad for the second, and merely difficult after that. 7 hours. Interstate 90 to 94, east and then south. The sky clearing past Missoula and staying clear. Pale winter blue above the flat white distance. Dana spent the first 2 hours on the phone. Her general counsel. 2 board members she trusted with calibrated and specific information. Her executive assistant with precise instructions. Her personal attorney, to whom she described the mechanic's finding, and asked what options existed regarding the vote, the tampering evidence, and the 18-month pattern of coordinated shareholder action. Cole drove and did not appear to be listening. She was certain he was. By the 4th hour, she had done what she could do remotely. She put the phone in her lap and looked out the window at the flat Midwest, the kind of landscape that makes no claims on you and asks for nothing. "You haven't asked me what I'm going to do," she said. A mile passed. "No," he said. "Why not?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Because I'm not doing this to get something." She looked at his profile, the line of his jaw, the hands on the wheel, the same hands she had watched in the flashlight beam at 1 in the morning. "You have reason to want something," she said. "Most people would." "Maybe," he said. "But wanting it that way makes it about me. This isn't about me. What is it about then?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he had decided not to answer. "Someone cut your brake line," he said finally. "That means something worse than a board vote was on the table. I don't care who sits in what chair. I care that whoever was willing to do that doesn't get rewarded for it." She turned back to the window. "That's all?" she said. "That's enough," he said. And she recognized the phrase from 2 nights before and did not push further. An hour outside Chicago, the sun went down, turning the snow on the flat fields orange and gray. She watched it, "I didn't know," she said, "when I signed the papers 3 years ago. About Halton. About what IP Council had concluded before the severance was issued." He said nothing. "That's not an excuse," she said. "I should have known. It was my company and my decision, and I'm responsible for what it cost. I'm telling you what I actually understood at the time, not because it changes anything." A long silence. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "You told me the truth," he said. "That counts for something. I don't know how much yet, but it does." The skyline of Chicago rose against the dark distance, lit and specific, and she watched it come toward her and thought about what it meant to count for something when the accounting was not yet finished. He dropped her at the Marriott on Wacker Drive at 8:30. She got out and turned back to the open window. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Get some sleep. You've got a vote to win." She almost said something else. She wasn't certain what. He lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in the way that people acknowledge something without making more of it than it is, and then he put the truck in gear and was gone. She stood on the sidewalk in the wind off the lake and watched his taillights until they disappeared, and then she walked through the hotel doors. She was in the boardroom at 8:55 the next morning. She had pressed her clothes as flat as she could in the hotel room. She had the county mechanic's written report, transmitted by email at 6 a.m. She had a signed statement from the county deputy. She had from her attorney a formal request for postponement of the vote pending criminal investigation of interference with the principal officer, already drafted and already bearing her signature. She did not use the postponement request. She stood at the head of the table and presented. She presented the brake line evidence and the 18-month pattern of coordinated shareholder positioning. She presented the site review data she had been driving to recover when her car was disabled. Then she presented the case for her continued leadership of Ashworth Infrastructure on its merits, which were substantial and which she had reviewed in her head across 7 hours of winter highway. She spoke for 40 minutes. She answered questions for 30. The vote was 7-4 in her favor. She walked out of that boardroom still, the chief executive officer of Ashworth Infrastructure Group. She went back to her office and sat behind her desk for the first time in 4 days and looked out at the frozen lake and did not pick up her phone for a long while. She thought about what it meant to win a vote that someone had tried to prevent her from attending by disabling her car on a mountain road in a blizzard. She thought about what it meant that she had attended anyway, not through any plan or contingency of her own, but because a man she had wronged 3 years ago had made a choice she would not have predicted and had not known to ask for. She turned this over slowly, trying to understand its actual weight rather than the weight she had expected. She had spent her professional life understanding leverage. She had just encountered someone who did not use it. The realization was stranger than she expected. It required categories she was not certain she had. Then she called her attorney. Not about the vote, not about the tampering investigation, which was ongoing and would produce results in time. She called about intellectual property, specifically the provenance of the design work underlying the Halton Bridge project, and what obligations, legal or ethical, might attach to a company that had retained that work under a standard employment agreement when the originating engineer was terminated. Her attorney was quiet for a moment. "That's a complicated question," he said. "I know," she said. "Ask it anyway." It took 2 weeks to prepare the envelope. She did not use company letterhead. She used a plain white envelope addressed by hand to Cole Merritt at the rural route number from the county assessor's records. Inside, she placed 2 things. The first was a single sheet of notepaper, handwritten. It read, "I cannot give back 3 years. I cannot undo a decision I made with incomplete information and insufficient care for what it cost. What I can do is make sure your name appears on the work that came from your mind. That process has already begun and will be completed. If you want it, the attached is a consulting agreement for the Caldwell River Crossing project. 14 months, the scope is yours to define. I will not pretend this makes things even. It doesn't. But it is what I can actually offer, and I would rather offer it than not." The second thing was a consulting agreement. 4 pages, already signed on the client line. Cole read it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening with Lily doing homework across from him, and the wood stove burning, and the lamp throwing its light across the walls. He read it twice and set it on the table, and did not pick it up again. He left it there for a week. He walked past it every morning when he made coffee. He saw it at meals. He did not move it or file it away. He left it in the open, in the center of the table. The way you leave something when you are not yet ready to decide what it means. He thought about anger, the particular kind that had been with him for 3 years, that he had learned to set down not because it was wrong, but because carrying it changed nothing and cost him something in the carrying. He had set it down the way you set down a heavy tool when the job is done. You do not throw it away. You set it down and you go on. He thought about the bridge, the Halton design, 18 months of work, load calculations done by hand and then by software, cross-sections revised a dozen times, the tension between structural efficiency and visual grace worked out through drawings like the one on his wall. He had submitted it under his name and his credential stamp. It was now built and standing across a river in Ohio, carrying traffic, doing what a bridge does, indifferent to the name on the plaque. He thought about Lily setting her drawing on the kitchen table between the two of them and saying what she said, in the way children sometimes say exactly the thing without knowing exactly what they are saying. He thought about 7 hours on winter roads and a woman who had sat in the 4th hour with her phone in her lap and said what she said about what she had and had not known, offering it as information and not as excuse, and who had not looked away when she said it. He thought about a person who does the unnecessary thing because it is the right thing and not because it benefits them. On the 8th day, Lily looked up from a drawing another bridge, this one more careful than the first, the lines meeting cleanly at the joints, and said, without preamble, "Is Miss Dana going to come back?" Cole looked at his daughter. He looked at the framed drawing on the wall. The pencil lines he had made years ago when he believed that what he built would carry his name. He looked at the consulting agreement on the table. He reached across, picked up the pen already lying there, and signed his name on the indicated line, not because the money resolved what had happened, not because the credit, once formally restored, would return the years between, not because forgiveness was a transaction that arrived in an envelope with a return address. He signed it because there was a bridge across the Caldwell River that had not yet been designed, because bridge design was the work he was best at in the world, and he had not done it in 3 years, and the absence had been a specific and daily loss, that he had gotten used to the way you get used to a loss when getting used to it is the only option, because a thing that needed doing, and a person capable of doing it, ought not to be kept apart indefinitely by the weight of what had already occurred. He set the pen down and looked at Lily. "I think she might," he said. Lily went back to her drawing. The lines came down cleaner now, the arches holding their shape, the proportions settling toward something that resembled intention. Cole watched her for a moment, the concentration on her face, the small, sure movements of her hand, and then he looked at the consulting agreement beside his coffee cup, signed now, already a different kind of object than it had been an hour before. He folded it back into the envelope. He would mail it in the morning when he drove Lily to school. He did not add a note, because what needed to be said had been said, and what remained would have to be demonstrated rather than stated, and he had spent 3 years in a cabin learning that some things cannot be accelerated. 2 weeks later, Dana called. She called on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was the same as he remembered, precise, controlled, calibrated to exactly the register required. But there was something under the precision now that had not been there in the car, or at the table, or in the snow outside. He thought of it as the sound a person makes when they have decided to stop managing the distance between what they mean and what they say. "The credit restoration is done," she said. "The Halton Bridge project record has been amended. Your name is on the original design documentation. It will be in the public record by the end of the month." "Okay," he said. "I wanted you to know directly." A pause. "How is Lily?" He looked across the room. Lily was at the kitchen table, drawing. More bridges lately, with increasing seriousness. "She's good," he said. "She's been drawing a lot." "Bridges?" "Bridges." Something that might have been a smile in the silence on the other end. "I've been looking at the Caldwell Crossing files," Dana said. "The preliminary survey data. The river gradient at the proposed span is interesting. There are some load considerations I don't think that the initial assessment handled correctly." He recognized this. She was starting the conversation they would need to have about the work, starting it the way you start a conversation you don't quite know how to start, by leading with the substance, letting the substance do the work that words alone cannot. "Send me the survey data," he said. "I will." A pause. "Cool." He waited. "Thank you," she said, "for the 7 hours. For all of it." He was quiet for a moment. The fire was going in the wood stove. The lamp was on. Outside, the Montana winter was dark and cold and complete, and the cabin was warm. He thought about all the ways a person could thank another person, and all the ways that words approximate the thing they are trying to describe. "Send me the survey data," he said again. "We'll figure out the rest." After he hung up, he sat at the table for a while. Lily had gone to bed. The lamp threw its amber light across the familiar walls, across the drawing in its reclaimed wood frame, across the signed consulting agreement in its envelope on the shelf by the door, ready to mail. He thought about bridges, about the gap a bridge is built to cross, and the fact that a bridge does not close a distance. It makes the distance visible, and then gives you a way across it. He thought this was probably true about more things than rivers. He turned off the lamp and went to bed. Spring came late to northwest Montana that year, the way it always did, reluctantly, in increments, the snow pulling back and then returning as if reconsidering, until one morning in late April, the temperature simply stayed above freezing, and the creek behind the cabin began to move again after 3 months of silence. Cole drove Lily to school on the first warm morning and stopped at the mailbox on the way back and found a package from Chicago. It contained the amended Halton Bridge project documentation, the pages, bearing his name in the designer field, the credential stamp reading C, Merit, P.E., in the title block where it had always belonged. He sat in the truck at the end of the drive and looked at the pages for a while. He was not sure what he had expected to feel. What he felt was quieter than anger and more settled than relief. It felt like a thing returned to its correct position, not dramatic, just right. The way a beam seats into a bearing when the tolerances are correct, a small sound, a small adjustment, and then stillness. He put the pages back in the package and drove up to the cabin. That afternoon, he spread the Caldwell River survey data across the kitchen table, topographic maps and soil core reports, and river gradient analyses, the raw material of a bridge, that existed so far only as a problem to be solved. He had called Dana twice that week about the load considerations she had flagged, and both conversations had lasted longer than the technical question required. Moving from the engineering data to other things and then back, the way conversations move, when the people in them are finding their way towards something they have not yet named. Lily came home at 3:15 and dropped her backpack and came to look at the maps. "Is that the new bridge?" she asked. "That's the one." "Is Miss Dana coming to see it when it's built?" He looked at his daughter. She asked questions the way children ask questions, when they are not quite asking about the thing they appear to be asking about. "I think so," he said. Lily nodded and went to do her homework. Cole went back to the survey data. Outside, the afternoon light was the gold of early spring in the mountains, long and clean, falling across the snow, still lingering at the tree line. The creek was audible from the kitchen. The drawing on the wall caught the light and held it the way it always had. Pencil lines and load notations, and the title block bearing his name. There was a bridge to design. He knew how to design it. The gap between the banks was specific and measurable, and he understood exactly what the structure required. He picked up his pencil and he began. The preliminary sketches came easily the way things come, when the hand has not forgotten what the mind remembers. He drew the span twice, exploring 2 approaches to the load distribution, and found the one that worked on the 3rd try. He noted the live load requirements, the wind exposure category, the seismic zone. He drew the deck profile and the bearing configuration and the drainage slopes. He worked until the light outside shifted from gold to blue, and the creek was no longer audible because the windows were closed and the evening had come down. He sat back and looked at what he had drawn. It was a good bridge. He could see that already. Even at this preliminary stage, the proportions were right. The structure honest about what it was doing. No decoration where the engineering was sufficient on its own. It would stand. It would carry what it needed to carry. It would do its work quietly for a long time. He thought about Lily's drawing. still getting better week by week on the kitchen table. He thought about the drawing on the wall, made years ago in a different life. He thought about the particular thing a bridge does in the world, not closing the distance between two banks, but making that distance navigable, giving people a way to reach each other that they did not have before. He thought it was probably true about more things than rivers. A week later, Dana flew to Missoula and drove a rental car north on Highway 83. She had made no announcement of her arrival. She had called from the road and said she was coming to look at the Caldwell River site before they finalized the preliminary design, which was true and also not entirely the point. Cole had said drive carefully, because the road through the canyon got narrow past mile marker 32, which was useful information and also not entirely the point. She arrived in the late afternoon. Lily was home from school and answered the door and looked at Dana for a moment with the same frank curiosity she had brought to their first meeting. "You came back," Lily said. "I did," Dana said. Lily considered this. "Okay," she said, and stood aside to let her in. Cole was at the kitchen table with the preliminary drawings spread across it. He looked up when she came into the room. The drawings were between them on the table, something real and specific and requiring their full attention. A bridge to be built across a real river in a real place, with load requirements and soil conditions, and a gradient that needed to be understood before anything else could be decided. She sat down across from him. He turned the drawings so she could see them. "The gradient's interesting," she said. "I know," he said. "I think I have a solution." Outside, the spring light held the mountains in the particular gold of late afternoon, and the creek ran in the near distance, moving now, carrying snowmelt from the high places down toward the valley, the way water always finds its level, the way things that have been waiting a long time eventually find their way to where they were always going.